Hello everyone, my name is Jane Harding and I'm presenting a very short webinar this morning to help you in making choices about looking for accommodation for next academic year. That's the academic year 2021-2022, sounds a very long time in advance, and I'm going to be assisted by Ella Ferris, who is going to change the slides for me, so I'm going to be talking to Ella throughout the presentation. Ella is one of our staff in Student Advice and probably the person you may speak to when you ring, and also is responsible for things like social media. So, student housing and COVID-19. I'm going to cover the main points that we would ask you to consider when you're looking for accommodation for 2021-2022, academic year 2021-2022, that is. We provide lots of really helpful information on our website, so please do look at that and read our web pages before you start your search. I'm hoping that you'll find information that will be really helpful to you. And you can always get in touch with Student Advice if you need. The main message that we deliver every year to students is not to rush. Around this time of year, you will find that letting agents will be encouraging you to sign contracts now for the academic year 2021-2022. They may say that you're not going to find accommodation if you don't start looking now, or that all the good properties will go, or there'll be lots of reasons why they'll be encouraging you to rush. It might be true, actually, for some agents, and some of the agents that have some of the best properties, or it might be true for some of the larger houses. But we have extensive experience in terms of advising students, and we feel that there is usually more student accommodation than there are students. And we find that even when we're advising students in September, there's still accommodation available. We never find that students are without accommodation. That could always change, of course, but so far it hasn't. It's in the interests of letting agents to sign you up now, because then they've got guaranteed income for quite a considerable time into the future. You can start your search, look at lots of properties, but don't feel pressured to sign contracts. Even without a pandemic, circumstances change. We find that students often might not decide to continue to study at Cardiff University, or they may withdraw from Cardiff University, or they may have committed to living with a certain group of people, then find that they don't actually want to live with that group of people anymore. So we see this a lot. We see circumstances change. Now, you're signing a contract now, potentially in November or December, that won't start until June and that will run until the following year, until about June 2022. So it's a massive commitment to make now. And the pandemic brings even more uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. You may have seen in the media last summer that a lot of students were trying to escape contracts because they couldn't live in the accommodation that they were paying for. It's a problem. We just don't know. It's an unprecedented set of circumstances. So just be mindful of that when you're making a decision, and be mindful of the fact that your tenancy will be legally binding, not only to the landlord or letting agent, but also to the other people in the property. Next slide, please. The right accommodation. This is just a quick description of the sort of accommodation that students usually live in, and we'll go through Cardiff University halls of residence, private halls of residence, and private rented accommodation. So Cardiff University residences, they do give priority to certain groups of students. So like, for instance, first year students will have a guaranteed room in Cardiff University residences. So there is limited availability for continuing students, but it's not, there is an option to do that. They usually start making rooms available for continuing students in about, I'm going to say February. They'll open up applications from about February, so that'd be February 2020-21. So it's a good option. There's flexibility in terms of the contracts there. So if you do have a change in your studies, such as remote study, or you have taken interruption of study, or you withdraw from study, then your contract can be brought to an end. So that can be helpful in uncertain times. Private halls of residence, there's been a massive explosion in this sort of accommodation in Cardiff, and the choice is endless, actually. You can pay anything from, I'm going to say, about £4,000 a year to about £8,000. I've actually seen contracts that are £8,000 a year. So, you know, there's massive choice in terms of that accommodation. You sometimes have very good facilities, actually. A bit like university accommodation, you'd be sharing with people that usually people you don't know. Sometimes you'll be asked to pay a whole year in advance, actually, so I'd be quite mindful of that and argue that if that's what you're asked to do. And then, of course, there's private rented accommodation, which is through it's a shared house, usually with a group of people that have decided to look for accommodation together and live together, and that could be through a letting agency or a landlord. These are something called assured short-hold tenancies, which means that you're legally bound to that contract and to that landlord for that period of time. I'll talk more about assured short-hold tenancies and joint assured short-hold tenancies in a minute. Next slide, please. So this is very important as well. The right people. So just get the slide here. There we are. So it's very important that you choose your housemates carefully. We are concerned that particularly this year you would have had limited opportunity to meet people actually. So making a decision about who you're going to live with now might be a little bit premature. And also because you're signing a contract many months in advance, your circumstances might change, and so might the circumstances of the people that you're living with. So that's something to definitely bear in mind. And really think about, can you see yourself living with these people for a whole year, or until, let's say, June or July 2022? Can you see yourself falling out with them? Who knows? I don't know. But I think it's very important to think very, very carefully about it, and have a really, really frank discussion about what you want in terms of living in a group, and make sure that you're kind of in agreement. So, is noise an issue for you? Are you a quiet person or are you a noisy person? Excuse me, are you a quiet person or a noisy person? Are you a tidy person or an untidy person? Does it matter to you that the washing up is done or not? So I think that all those things are very, very important considerations. So have a very, very good, thorough discussion about what you want. There's a lot of advice on our website about that. Next slide, please. The right landlord or letting agency. So if you're going into the private rented sector, you will usually find your accommodation through a letting agent or directly with a landlord. Now, it's important to choose those carefully, because essentially a good landlord or a good letting agent is integral in terms of whether or not you have a good experience in your private rented accommodation. If you don't have a good landlord or letting agent, you may find that a particular issue is repairs don't get done, or they don't get done very quickly, or there's not a response to any queries that you may have. So make sure that you make the right choice in terms of who is managing your property. All properties in Wales, there's new legislation in Wales, which means that all properties in Wales need to be registered with an organisation called Rent Smart Wales. This is a regulator, and these properties need to be also managed by somebody who is licensed to manage them, and that means that they've had training in terms of managing properties, and there's code of practice. So you know that you should be getting a fairly good standard of service if that property is registered with Rent Smart Wales. Be aware that letting agents can act as even a managing agent or a finding agent, and it's important to establish what their role is from the start. A finding agent will literally find you the property and sign the contract, and then the management of the property will be handed over to the landlord immediately. A managing agent will manage the property throughout your tenancy, and you will only ever deal with them. Again, a good landlord or letting agent is integral in terms of the experience that you'll have during your tenancy. Choose carefully. Look at reviews. Most have reviews online, and they're not always to be relied on, but they give you an indication of the sort of view that tenants have of their landlords or letting agents. Next slide. Viewing a property. And this is very important advice for this year, because things have changed, and there's going to be digital viewings mainly, we imagine. So we want to give you some specific advice about digital viewings. Always remember you're a consumer. You're paying a lot of money. You're going to be handing over thousands of pounds over a year in terms of rent. So make sure that you're making the right choice and you ask lots of questions, and that you're really happy with the accommodation that you've chosen. We would prefer you to not do digital viewings and wait until you can actually view in person. That might not be possible because we don't know what's happening in terms of lockdown and what the pandemic's going to be like. The Welsh Government have encouraged digital viewings on accommodation, because obviously it's minimising the risk of transmission of the virus. But there are issues around it. So we just want you to be very, very wary of digital viewings. So if you visit a property, you can smell the damp, you can judge room sizes, you can ask current tenants about their experience of living in the property and the service they're getting from an agent or landlord. If you're looking at a digital viewing, that might have been made some time in advance, so we don't know whether or not it's going to be a true indication of the condition of the property or not. We just don't know. So what we would suggest is to protect yourselves, ask lots of questions and get confirmation of this via email in writing of things like, is the property damp? Ask that question. Ask for the actual room measurements. Ask for lists of furniture. Get everything you are relying on in terms of renting that property in writing. And anything that's promised should actually be written into your contract as a special condition. Ask for a copy of the video, download it and keep it. You might rely on it later if things go wrong. Go to the property location, have a look around, have a look at the outside of the property. Does it look okay? Does it look like it's in disrepair? And check the surrounding area. Is this a place you'd want to live? We've got a very good viewing property checklist on our website, so use that. It's a really, really, really useful tool. Next slide. So the essential checks, yes, okay, so we've gone through, is the property registered with Rent Smart Wales, and the licensing requirements there. But the other main issue is, does the property have an HMO license? An HMO is a house in multiple occupation. I'm going to say most student houses do require an HMO license. You can find lots of information about this on our website. If you want to check a property has an HMO license, then you can contact Cardiff Council Shared Regulatory Services, and they will confirm that for you. You need to check if it's licensed, it has current license, and how many people it's licensed for. If the property is licensed for, say, there's 5 of you and it's licensed for 4, then you do need to seek advice about that, because it's not licensed correctly. And come to us if you feel that there are any questions you have about the licensing. Next slide, please. Holding fees and prohibited payments. Okay, so up until I think it was September 2019, agents could charge quite hefty fees for their services. I'm going to say about £100 per person in a tenancy. So that's quite a lot of money. That changed, and now they can only charge a holding fee, and that's equivalent to a week's rent, and that is refundable then if you sign a tenancy contract. It can either be refundable, I think it's within 15 days of it being paid, or you can, by agreement, have it deducted from the first month's rent, and I think that's what most commonly happens actually. So it's a significant change from how it was before. You're supposed to be provided with sort of prescribed information before you pay that holding fee, so you know what you're signing up to or potentially be signing up to. They can't charge, I'm going to give an indication of the prohibited payments, they're called. Payments for a change of sharer, payments to alter or amend a contract, check-in and check-out fees, agency fees as I've described before, and referencing and credit checks. If you're concerned that you're being charged a prohibited payment, then do get in touch with us and we'll advise further. You can make a complaint about that to Shared Regulatory Services at Cardiff Council if you are concerned. Next slide, please. When you sign a contract, you'll be required to pay a deposit normally. Not all landlords and letting agents charge a deposit actually. It's usually about equivalent to a month's rent, might be a little bit more. It must be protected by law. There's laws to ensure that that tenancy deposits are sort of handled properly and fairly. So they're protected in either a custodial scheme, which means the money is actually given to the government scheme. The Tenancy Deposit Protection Service is the main custodial scheme, or insurance-based scheme, which means that the money is still held by your landlord or letting agent. But if there's a problem at the end, then the scheme will give an independent decision about what money should be returned to you. So quite often we find that at the end of a tenancy, the money isn't returned or the deductions are considered unreasonable. So you have the opportunity to ask for an independent decision about what happens to that money. So just make sure it's protected. The fact that it says in your contract that it's protected is not sufficient. You need to get confirmation within 30 days of you paying that money from the scheme with a unique ID number. That's usually via email to the lead tenant on a property. So just be absolutely certain that the property, the tenancy deposit is protected. And if you have any questions, get in touch with us. Next slide, please. When you are searching for your property, most letting agents and landlords will require UK-based guarantor, and that's usually a home-owning adult. If you can't provide a guarantor, sometimes you will be asked to pay quite a lot of rent in advance, so that the landlord or letting agent has that additional security. Sometimes it's a year in advance. We don't think that's reasonable actually. Maybe 3 months or something like that would be okay. If you can't afford that, or you don't want to do that, then you can maybe shop around, because we find that the different letting agents will have different ideas about how they can protect their money and whether or not they want a guarantor. So it may be that if you go to a different organisation, they may be able to provide you with a different service. Cardiff University do provide a guarantor service to some students, and the information is available on our website. So if you can't get a guarantor, then Cardiff University will act as a guarantor for you. There are sort of restrictions on that and certain requirements, but essentially that service is available if you need it. The guarantor agreement depends very much on the wording of it. So the guarantor will usually be required to cover your liability under the terms of the contract, which is rent and disrepair, but actually it can be for the whole of the tenancy from a joint assured short-hold tenancy. So it can be a little bit complex. If in doubt, like I said, come and see us and we'll talk to you more about it. That's guarantors. Contracts. I think I have gone through this a bit before, but it's essentially an assured short-hold tenancy agreement, and that they are usually on what is called a joint contract. And the best way to describe this is that you're not individuals within that tenancy. You're considered as one unit, which means all parties within that tenancy agreement are jointly and severally liable. And that means that effectively, if one person doesn't pay their rent, then everyone else is responsible for it. You have to think of the rent as one payment, not lots of individual payments. It can create problems because obviously then if somebody decides to move out or doesn't want to live in the property anymore, then the liability is left with everybody else, and potentially everybody else is guarantors and their guarantor. So it's just something to be aware of, that that's what you're doing when you sign that contract. You can ask for individual contracts actually in a shared house, but we do find that there's a reluctance to provide those because essentially a joint assured short-hold tenancy provides more security to the landlord. Break clauses. Okay, so within a assured short-hold tenancy or a joint assured short-hold tenancy, you're bound by that contract until it ends to the people in the house and also to your landlord or letting agent. A break clause can bring that tenancy contract to an end a little bit earlier or by agreement. I think there's going to be a reluctance to include break clauses, but we're encouraging students to ask for break clauses in the contracts because we don't know what's going to happen. So you might have a break clause that's related to the pandemic, for instance, if you're not able to occupy the property, or potentially that there's been a sort of a wider change of circumstance. I don't know, but you can negotiate that with your landlord or letting agent and see if they're able to provide a break clause. Next slide, please. So that concludes this very short presentation about housing and COVID-19. I just wanted to say a little bit about student advice and what we do in terms of housing. We provide a contract checking service, and we can advise on specific issues that may arise before and during and at the end of your tenancy. We have a web page content that's really, really helpful, so do look at it. It will really, really inform you of everything that you need to know. You can contact us, and if you have a specific question or query or concern, then you can contact us. We're working remotely, obviously, for now. That may change, but we don't know when. But you can contact us through web form, web chat, telephone, or email to advice@cardiff.ac.uk. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope that you find a really good place to live for next academic year, and good luck.